Hi, Year 11. Hope everyone's well. This is another video for the Christianity unit. This is quite a straightforward one. It should be quite a short video. How do Christians today follow the example of Jesus? So we've talked about Jesus a few different ways, about the titles of Jesus. We've looked at his teachings. We looked at the major events in his life. But as well as that, the example I want you to know, and with good reason, how Christians might follow the example of Jesus, and we'll look at why the reason is, because it's kind of important, I suppose, for Christians to follow the example of Jesus. This is quite straightforward, this lesson. So there is a worksheet that if you can print off, you can use, or even if you can't print it off, then it's not really much of a big deal, because you just need to make sure you take down the notes that will be on the worksheet. The only difference would be that the worksheet has the quotes on, so you might need to write out the quotes so that you have those in your notes. So this is a perfect thing for a 6-mark question, just like this. Explain how Christians follow the example of Jesus today. And so we're going to go through 3 ways in which Christians might follow the example of Jesus. So make sure you've got the title written down. These 2 phrases I think we've talked about before. It would be good to write down just to remind you. WWJD, what would Jesus do? That's a phrase that many modern Christians, it's famous in America really, many modern Christians use, and you sometimes see it on a wristband like that. And imitatio Dei is the more traditional form, the Latin form. Imitatio Dei means imitating God. And of course, Jesus is the incarnation of God according to Christianity. So both of these ideas, what would Jesus do in Imitatio Dei, represent the idea that Jesus is supposed to be the perfect example of a human being. Remember, although he's God, Jesus is also a human being according to Christianity. He's fully human and fully God. And therefore, because he's the perfect human being, then his example is a good one to follow. And one way of thinking about the Christian life, or how someone lives as a Christian, is about the idea of imitating Jesus, or trying to make themselves as much like Jesus as they can. So with that in mind, so make sure you have those 2 things. What would Jesus do in Imitatio Dei written down? And just explain that both of them are about Christians saying when in their life they want to act as much as Jesus as they can. We're going to go on to the examples. So if you've got your worksheet, we're going to go through these different quotes from the Bible. We're going to explain what Jesus is doing in this quote, and then so in the first box we're going to say, what does the quote mean? What's going on here? And how might Christians follow it? And then we're going to try and give some examples of following it in the next box. So let's look at the first one. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. So this is taken from the part of the Bible where Jesus dies. And what's significant? Well, what's significant is that Jesus forgives the people who are killing him as they kill him. In fact, not only are they killing him, but the soldiers who are involved are dividing up his clothes by casting lots. So basically, they're gambling to see who gets what of his belongings. So they're acting in a very callous way, but he forgives them. So what's the quote about? Well, it shows that Jesus was willing to forgive people, even people who'd committed very terrible sins. There's another famous example in the Bible where Jesus eats a meal with Zacchaeus, who is a tax collector. Now, the thing about tax collectors in those days, we've got to think about it, is that most of the people who lived in Israel were Jewish, as Jesus was, and so was this guy Zacchaeus, a tax collector. But the people who ruled over it were the Romans, and therefore people who collected taxes were collecting money from people to give to the Romans. Now, what's wrong with that? Well, in our society, most people agree with the idea of paying tax. Some people have different ideas about whether you should pay more or less, but most people agree with the basic idea that you pay tax because the tax is used to benefit the country in various ways, through education or the police, the armed forces, the welfare state, all these different things, the NHS, all these different things are funded by tax. But at the time, this was a society where there wasn't a good relationship between the people who lived there and the rulers. That people basically felt like their money was just being taken by the Romans. Therefore, people like the tax collectors were regarded as really the lowest of the low in that society, because people thought of them as traitors. They were Jewish people who were working for the enemy of the Jewish people, the Romans. and therefore they were seen as like biggest sinners in society, really, the tax collectors. And so that's another example of Jesus forgiving him. Jesus eats a meal with this guy Zacchaeus and forgives his sins, even though he sins a really big sinner. So both that story of Zacchaeus and then this quote just show Jesus is very, as well as teaching about forgiveness, he practices forgiveness himself. So how can Christians follow the example? Well, of course, by forgiving people in their own life. Then it says, give a particular example. Well, in the Religion, Peace and Conflict unit, we looked at this. In the Religion, Peace and Conflict unit, we looked at this case, which is the case of Anthony Walker and his mother, G. Walker. Anthony Walker was killed, a young man who was killed in this country in a racially motivated attack. A really horrible crime. And his mother, G. Walker, it became even more well-known case, I suppose, because of her reaction in which she forgave the killers. Not that she didn't say they should go to prison and things like that, she thought they should, but she expressed forgiveness towards them. So that would be an example of someone who would follow Jesus' example by forgiving in a really, in a situation where many would find it very difficult to forgive. Okay, let's look at the next one. So make sure, if you haven't got your worksheet, make sure you're writing down the quotes, explaining them, and explaining the example afterwards. Okay, Simon's mother-in-law. So this is about Simon, who's a disciple of Jesus, one of his followers. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever and immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. Wait on them means she began to cook for them and stuff like that in the house. Explain the quote. So what's it saying? Well, this is an example of Jesus healing someone through his miraculous powers. There are lots of examples like this in the Bible. You could talk about the time when he told the paralyzed man to get up and walk, and gave a blind man his sight, and all these different examples. Now, this is an interesting one because obviously Jesus it's supposed to be a miracle according to the Bible. How can you follow that example? Well, generally, Christians can't perform miracles themselves, although we'll look at that in a minute, about obviously that Christians do believe that miracles still can happen today. But most Christians don't believe that they personally can perform those miracles. It would have to come from God. But more generally, to follow that, what it shows is that Jesus, however he does it, believes in healing people. It's a good idea to heal the sick. And so Christians might follow that example by helping those who are sick or ill, by helping to heal them. I've given a couple of examples to show you different ways you can think about that. So both of these can go in your examples, how Christians have put this into practice. So the Christian Medical Fellowship was something that was founded in 1949. It has over 4,000 doctors and 800 medical students as members throughout the UK and Ireland. And they're basically based on Jesus' example of healing, follow his example by healing the sick. Basically, the idea of that medical fellowship is just to encourage Christians to go into the practice of medicine, to basically say, look, Jesus healed the sick. We can't do that with supernatural methods because we're just normal human beings. But it's to say, well, as Christians, there should be an interest taken in healing the sick. It also tries to do things like try and encourage the following of Christian ethics in medicine. So it might have things to say about abortion and euthanasia and things like that. But it's basically just encouraging Christians to get involved in healthcare. On the other hand, another interesting one, Christian Healing UK is an organisation which brings together Christians who believe in spiritual healing. So they believe in following Jesus' example by praying for miraculous healing for people who are ill. Now, obviously, that they wouldn't think that miraculous healing comes from them, but they are a group who think that if someone's ill, you can pray, and that prayer could help them to bring about a miracle, miraculous healing. So this is two different kinds of Christian responses to how they can follow Jesus' example. Either go into the medical profession and bring about healing that way, or be involved in praying for those who are ill to try and bring about a miraculous healing. Okay, I'm going quite quickly through these, so make sure you're pausing when you need to. Let's look at the last one. The last one's a little bit more tricky to understand. This quote comes from a part of the Bible around the Last Supper. So, Jesus, before he's crucified, the night before, he sits down with his disciples and he shares a meal with them. it's at that part where you get the tradition of eating bread and drinking wine to remember Jesus, because Jesus shares bread and wine with his disciples, and then he says to them, "Do this in remembrance of me." After that, though, he does this thing. So it says, after that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with a towel that was wrapped around him. So he washes the feet of the disciples and then dries the feet. Now you might think, hold on, what's going on here? Are you going to tell me that Christians should follow, are very, very interested in washing people's feet? Well, no, I'm not going to say that. Although because of this example, there are famous examples of times when Christians have washed people's feet. Part of the Easter celebrations, Easter week celebrations, involve the washing of feet. In fact, in this country, it used to be part of the Easter week celebrations. I can't remember. Is it Maundy Thursday? I can't remember. I better not say that and just got it wrong. There's a day when washing of feet happens, and traditionally it was done by the king or queen of the country would wash the feet of some poor people in the country. Now, but it's not for us. It's not the washing of feet that's important, because when Jesus is asked what it's all about, Jesus says that he came to serve others, and that the disciples should be the same, that they should serve others. So in other words, the idea is that even though Jesus was God on earth, and like a great leader, Lord as they call him, he has authority over everyone. He came to serve other people. So even though he's this grand person who's God on earth, he came to serve other people, and that's how Christians should behave as well. They shouldn't think of themselves as better than others because they're Christians. They should act as servants towards other people. So how to follow the example of Jesus here is not to go around washing people's feet, but to go around acting as a servant towards others. So that just really means helping those others, and particularly helping the poorest in society, because that's you saying that, like Jesus, you're not thinking of yourselves as better than those people, you're going to act as the servant for those people. So here's just one example of how Christians might act as a servant towards others. There's lots of Christian charities, but a famous one is CAFOD, which is a Catholic charity, the Catholic Agency for Overseas Development, or CAFOD. They're a Catholic charity that follows the example of Jesus by acting as servants to others. And what do? So basically, they go to the poorest areas of the world and they provide help for people in those areas. So, for example, things they might do: providing relief after natural disasters. So if there's earthquakes or drought, famine, hurricanes, tsunamis, they might go and provide medical care, also food, also build housing if people's houses have been destroyed. They also do this by giving people in the poorest parts of the world skills and equipment which enable them to support themselves. So they will go to poor parts of the world, not just give food and money and things, but give them the skills and equipment they need to set themselves up in business so that they can support themselves. They also do campaigning and speaking out when governments or other groups make decisions which harm the poor. So they will try to campaign politically to make it so that things are more equal for the poor, so that the governments of different parts of the world are thinking more about the poorest people in the world when they make decisions for their country. So that's lots of the things that CAFOD does, and Christians work with that group as just try and follow the example of Jesus, being a servant to others rather than being a king over other people. Okay, last thing I want you to do then in this part of the lesson is to answer this 6-mark question just based upon what we've seen, based upon the examples we just went through. So you're going to do 3 SEs for this question. Explain how Christians today follow the example of Jesus. So look, I'll just talk you through it. One way in which Christians can follow the example of Jesus is, and this is where you put the general idea, so you'd put by helping to heal those who are sick. In the Bible, you give the quote, of what happened to Simon's mother who had the fever. Then it says in brackets, do you need to explain the quote? Well, that one I think you would need to explain the quote, right? So this shows that Jesus healed people using his miraculous powers, and Christians think it's a good idea to, even if they can't heal people miraculously, to follow this example. And then you give the example. An example of Christians following Jesus in this way is, and you talk about one of the two examples, the Christian Medical Fellowship or the group who prays for people. And then so your next one, you could go for one way in which Christians can follow the example of Jesus is by forgiving others. In the Bible, Jesus says, when he's being crucified, Jesus says, Father, forgive me, for they know not what they're doing. An example of a Christian who followed this is G. Walker, and explain what happened to G. Walker and her son. I don't think you need to explain the quote because I think it's pretty straightforward. And the last one, final way in which Christians can follow the example of Jesus today is you go for your last one, which was by acting as a servant for others. You give the quote, what happened. You've got to explain that quote because it looks like it's just about washing feet, but you've got to say that this here, Jesus was showing that although he was God on earth, he believed he should be a servant for the people, and Christians feel they should act in the same way. And then give the example. For example, CAFOD, explain how CAFOD acts as a servant for others. Hope that makes sense. Fairly kind of straightforward 6-marker really, but I would like you to upload them if you can to Teams when you finished. This will be the first video today. There will be another one for the second part of the lesson. Thank you.